Hello, and thank you for attending our session called Using Self-Assessment in ESL Pronunciation Classes. My name is Kathleen Brannan, and this is my colleague Emily Rosales. Emily and I have been teaching credited speech perception and pronunciation courses for about 20 years at the Language School at the University of Quebec in Montreal. Isabelle Wouters is a PhD candidate in the Second Language Didactics Department at UQAM, and Paul John is an associate professor at the University of Quebec in Trois-Rivières. I now turn the floor over to Emily to start us off.
Thank you, Kathleen. So let's start by talking about self-monitoring, which is a person's moment-by-moment awareness of the likelihood of maintaining a skill correctly to act appropriately in a particular situation. Research from Harris and Brown shows that self-monitoring in learners is often shaped by their own observations and intuitions. One challenge is that inaccurate intuitions may lead them to overgeneralize concepts. Another challenge is that their self-monitoring may be based on incorrect assumptions. For example, they may sometimes misunderstand the teacher's expectations. Also, feedback from peers may be incomplete, wrong, or biased, especially to encourage the learner or to avoid hurt feelings. In these cases, learners may inaccurately evaluate their real ability and maintain unrealistic perceptions, thus distracting them from dedicating time and energy on their weaknesses. Learners then may lose their motivation or develop negative attitudes towards learning. Students may even resist helpful feedback to avoid certain tasks if they feel that their ego is being threatened. As a result, all of these situations prevent students from learning new skills. Students run the risk of hitting a plateau and developing fossilized habits. As such, there can be negative consequences if students are left to their own devices in any learning task. Now let's look at how self-assessment, the focus of our talk, may help the teacher respond to these challenges. So, in self-assessment, learners globally judge their own abilities through awareness-raising activities. Because the teacher guides the student in self-assessment activities, learners are not left to self-monitor their learning outcomes on their own. Some self-assessment studies show that this type of formative assessment seems to have a positive impact on learning. However, self-assessment is nonetheless a skill that needs to be modeled explicitly and learned. Let's now look at one particular skill that is difficult to acquire, and that is second language pronunciation. So research has shown that for adult language learners, uh, pronunciation in the second language is very resistant to change. Erroneous articulatory habits have become fossilized and are thus difficult to overcome. Researchers have reported that some language teachers may feel that they lack the training required to instruct their students in L2 pronunciation and correct their errors. As such, there is often not enough focus on pronunciation instruction in the language classroom, despite an ever-increasing amount of innovative research and pedagogical technology strategies and tools available. So how does self-monitoring apply to L2 pronunciation? Research shows that students have trouble evaluating their own pronunciation. In fact, research by Derwing and Rossiter show that prior to pronunciation training, learners tend to report segmental difficulties and are less aware of their suprasegmental errors. Even with teacher feedback, learners may still feel unsure of how to correct themselves in order to get from their present level of skill to the teacher's standard of performance. Another challenge of self-monitoring involves the trade-off of limited attentional resources. Given the many segmental and suprasegmental aspects of pronunciation to simultaneously attend to, the high demand on attention means that learners can only focus on some aspects at once to the detriment of others. So what do learners need to know to better self-monitor their pronunciation? Activities that raise awareness are important. For example, metalinguistic awareness of different rules, such as particular sound spelling correspondences, are helpful. Awareness training should also include developing articulatory and perceptual proprioceptive skills, such as gently feeling the tongue between the teeth for the TH sound, but most importantly, and attending to acoustic cues, such as producing a stream of air for the H sound and listening for that aspect during performance. Studies on self-assessment have shown improvement on vowels and on suprasegmentals, so our goal in the present study is to determine if self-assessment can improve the pronunciation of English consonants. Several studies have shown that L2 learners of English tend to substitute alveolar td or sz for both the voiceless and voiced interdental consonants th in the th, so that think that sounds like tink dat or sink zat. Please note that for the rest of the presentation, we will refer to the voiceless th as theta and the voiced th as eth. Also, for L2 students, especially native French speakers, they tend to delete the H phoneme so that the word heart sounds like art, and in some cases they may insert H or the H sound before a vowel as in happle. So now I'll give the floor to my colleague Kathleen, and she'll talk about our research study in more detail.
Thanks, Emily. So our research project was inspired by a study by Wooters and John 2020. They looked at whether learners are able to detect their own pronunciation errors of TH and H. They found that learners were able to identify their errors and that errors on H were better perceived than errors on TH. And within the H errors, learners were better able to hear those involving H epenthesis than H deletion. So learners are indeed able to detect their own errors in pronunciation. Building on the Wooters and John study, we wanted to test whether self-assessment activities could improve students' pronunciation of TH and H. Participants of varying proficiency levels completed a pre- and post-test consisting of 40 short phrases that included words incorporating these sounds. The test groups completed weekly self-assessment activities targeting various aspects of pronunciation, including, of course, the TH and H sounds. The control groups did not have the self-assessment component. Results did not show significant differences between the pre- and post-test performance, nor were there any significant differences between the test and control groups. Nonetheless, there were differences between test items. It was found that the TH substitution errors were more frequent than H insertion errors, a finding that's in accordance with what Wooters and John found, where their students had more trouble hearing the TH sounds compared to their H sound errors. The TH errors compared to their H errors. So in the study that we're reporting on today, we extend this research by examining performance in longer sentences. So because the phrase data didn't show significant differences, we thought that this may have been because these short phrases were quite easy to pronounce, especially for the advanced learners. Maybe even affording both test and control groups time to use metalinguistic knowledge in their production. So perhaps if we challenged them with a more difficult task, we could see improvement afforded by the self-assessment tasks. Therefore, we included sentence stimuli in the pre and post test. And we report on the results from our pronunciation 3 groups in this presentation, in other words, the advanced learners. Data from lower level learners has yet to be analyzed. So data from this study come from 3 of our pronunciation 3 classes. These are advanced pronunciation classes. There were 22 students in all who participated, 12 francophones and 10 with other language L1 language backgrounds. For the non-francophones, French was either their second or additional language, and both the test and control groups had 11 participants each. So here we see the stimuli used in the pre and post tests. These tests consisted of 25 sentences of varying length, composed of high frequency words that were expected to elicit the TH or H errors. So here are a couple of example sentences with the target segments in orange. 2 experienced pronunciation instructors rated consonant accuracy in all sentences. A third instructor settled cases of disagreement. The rate, all raters were native speakers of English. And the rate of agreement was very high, as can be seen here, ranging from 90.6% to 99.8%, depending on the segment. We collected data that students recorded in an online platform called Learning Branch. Students recorded the pre-test at the beginning of the semester and the post-test at the end of the semester. Most participants also took part in a guided interview at the end of the semester. Throughout the semester, the test groups completed 10 low-stakes self-assessments in which they recorded themselves reading a text. Then they listened to a native speaker model, and next they analyzed their production and compared it to the model. The self-assessments guided them in progressively more comprehensive weekly self-evaluations. The instructors subsequently commented on their self-assessments. And recall that the control group was not assigned the self-assessment activities. So here are the results. This graph compares the pronunciation errors made by the test group, which are the blue bars, with the control group, which are the yellow bars. In addition, performance in pre-test, as shown by the darker bars, is compared to performance in post-test, shown by the lighter shaded bars. We can see that both the test and control groups had fewer errors in post-test compared to pre-test. See the errors go down here, except for ETH substitution. For H deletion and theta substitution, the control group was weaker than the test group in pre-test, as you can see here, but made considerable improvement in post-test, significantly so for theta. So you can see the difference here. For ETH substitution, the control group remained the same in post-test, while the test group actually had more errors in post-test. So this led to a significant difference in post-test between the test group and the control group. There was also significance between error types. For both groups in pre-test, theta substitution errors were significantly higher than both types of H errors. And this was maintained in post-test, reaching significance for ETH substitution versus the H errors. So in summary, pre and post-test data did not show any significant differences between the test and control groups, except that the test group actually had more errors in post-test, the opposite from what was predicted. However, both test and control groups did improve on H and theta. Looking at the error types, we see that TH errors were more numerous than H errors for both groups. The results from the sentence data thus resemble the phrase data reported by Brannan and et al. 2021. Let's now look at the qualitative results from the guided interviews. So comments from these interviews suggested that learners viewed self-assessment in a positive light and considered the activities with teacher feedback to be useful. Many found the activities difficult at first, but were able to develop their skills over time, empowering them to extend this type of self-monitoring to their daily lives. Self-assessment helped raise awareness of their pronunciation strengths and weaknesses. And interestingly, several participants noted that they paid more attention to suprasegmentals than to segmentals, and we'll come back to that in a moment. All in all, participants felt that their English pronunciation had improved thanks to self-assessment. And for those of you who are interested, the comments from the some comments from the students are in the appendix at the end of this PowerPoint. Let's now look a little bit more closely at the quantitative results and the differences in error types. So first of all, we found that learners made more errors overall on TH versus H. So why might this be so? Well, for one, errors on TH involve substituting one segment for another, while errors on H involve adding or deleting an entire segment. It may be that it's easier to overcome these insertion-deletion errors than it is to overcome substitution errors. As well, we speculate that substitution errors may be more likely to fossilize. This is all the more likely given that the pre- and post-test stimuli consisted of high-frequency words, meaning that they're acquired early and thus potentially mispronounced for a long time. A puzzling finding was that the test group actually had more errors on ETH in post-test, whereas the control group did not. This may be because the self-assessment group received conflicting information. The teacher told students not to focus on ETH in function words, such as the determiner the. The reason being that focusing on ETH in function words usually causes learners to stress them, which disrupts sentence rhythm. Thus, instructions to ignore EV conflicted with the self-assessments which directed students' attention to EV, and this may have led to some confusion, possibly contributing to the increased errors in post-test. Finally, we've seen that there is more errors on EV than on theta. This difference is likely due to the relatively low perceptual salience of EV, partly manifested in the longer duration of theta versus EV. Note that this weak saliency of EV is also reflected in the lower inter-rater agreement on EV pronunciation. So it was around 90% compared to the other error types. So given that there was no advantage for the test group compared to the control group, what does this say about the value of self-assessment activities? Could it be that there's no real benefit to self-assessment and that pronunciation teaching in itself is sufficient to help students improve? If so, then why does previous research show that self-assessment activities involving vowels and suprasegmentals are helpful? Are consonants resistant to improvement through self-assessment? Maybe not. As previously mentioned, comments from the interviews indicated that students tended to pay more attention to suprasegmentals than to segmentals. Thus, it may be that learners cannot attend to both due to limited cognitive resources. Furthermore, Derwing and Rossiter point out that naive students, when asked what their pronunciation problems were, overwhelmingly responded that they had problems with segmentals, including TH. So it may be that before receiving pronunciation training, students are unaware of the suprasegmental aspects of pronunciation. And once they receive instruction on the prosodic elements of English, this new awareness may help motivate them to direct their focus to suprasegmentals at the expense of segmentals. Now, Emily will discuss some ways in which self-assessment might be improved.
Thank you, Kathleen. So, how can you improve your self-assessment practices? According to Brown and Harris, you can start by assigning frequent, well-structured self-assessment activities with clear criteria and guidelines against which your students can monitor and measure their own abilities. As you may recall, we recommend more focus on developing proprioceptive, articulatory, and perceptual skills and their metalinguistic awareness. It is important to provide concrete feedback in a timely manner with actionable steps that your students will be able to approve upon also. This should help your students form a more favorable attitude towards learning English. In turn, they will become more engaged with the course material and its nuances, and also will become better equipped to take on more challenging learning tasks. Then overall, they will develop essential self-regulatory skills that foster learner autonomy and empowerment. So now, in closing, the results do not allow us to definitively conclude that self-assessment had a positive effect on these segments. However, this does not mean that the added instruction through self-assessment does not benefit students in ways that were not measured in the study. Self-assessment may have positively influenced overall comprehensibility and intelligibility through better attention to suprasegmentals. It may have also influenced their attitudes and their overall perception. So for future projects, we're looking into ways to refine our pre and post test. Oh, so for future projects, we're looking into ways to refine our pre and post test design by investigating learner self-monitoring and self-assessment strengths and challenges in more detail. Other ways of improving the experimental design include imposing time limits, adding delayed post-tests, or eliciting extemporaneous speech. To conclude, hopefully our research will help ESL teachers better support the pronunciation needs of their students. As they get better at knowing what to monitor and when, they will become better at regulating their own learning and thus become more autonomous language learners. So we would like to thank Jamie D'Imperio, Peter Enns, and Bo Zucker, and the funding from the Quebec government. Thank you very much for your attention, and we welcome your questions.